I am Joshua, 32 years old, and after I refused to pay off my parents' mortgage, they told the entire family I stole my grandpa's money. Before I tell you about the dramatic outcome of the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The smell of roasted turkey and cornbread dressing hung heavy in the air at Aunt Marlene's house. 30 of my relatives were crammed into the living room, sitting shoulder to shoulder at 3 long folding tables pushed together. It was supposed to be a day of gratitude, but the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a carving knife. I sat quietly near the end of the table, nursing a glass of iced tea. Everyone was avoiding my gaze. My cousins looked down at their plates. My aunts whispered behind their napkins. They had all heard the rumors. They had all picked a side. My father, Gerald, sat at the head of the table. He was wearing a pressed navy blazer, dressed up for a man who usually wore old flannel on holidays. My mother, Denise, sat right beside him, her hands folded, her eyes already glistening with fresh, calculated tears. She always knew exactly when to turn on the waterworks. We were 20 minutes into the meal when my father tapped his knife against his water glass. The room went dead silent. The low murmur of the football game playing on the TV in the den suddenly sounded incredibly loud. He stood up slowly, placing both hands on the table, and looked around the room like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Before we go around and say what we're thankful for," he began, his voice booming across the dining room, "I need to address something that's been weighing heavily on this family." My pulse hammered in my ears, but I kept my face entirely blank. I didn't move a muscle. I just watched him. He looked down at my mother. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue right on cue. "Most of you have heard the rumors," my father continued, his voice dropping to a somber, theatrical tone. "I wish I didn't have to do this publicly. Believe me, Denise and I tried to handle this privately. But our son left us no choice." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Uncle Thomas set his fork down with a loud clink. "After my father passed away, we discovered that a significant amount of money was missing from his accounts. We looked into it, we traced it, and the evidence points to one person in this room." He turned his head and locked eyes with me. 30 pairs of eyes instantly followed his gaze. "Our son Joshua is a thief," he announced. His voice didn't waver. "And we have proof." Aunt Marlene gasped. My younger cousin Caleb stared at me, his eyes wide. My mother's crying grew louder, perfectly pitched to draw maximum sympathy. My father stood over me, expecting me to crumble. He expected me to yell, to deny it, to storm out of the house in shame. That was his script. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and looked him dead in the eye. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a crisp, white envelope. He walked slowly around the table, parading it past everyone until he stood right beside my chair. He slammed it down on the table right in front of my plate. "This is a court summons," he said, loud enough for the kids in the other room to hear. "We are suing you for the return of your grandfather's inheritance." I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. I let the silence stretch out for a long, agonizing moment. Then I smiled. I reached under my chair, pulled my own thick manila envelope from my leather bag, and placed it gently on the table right next to his. "Funny?" I said, my voice steady and cold. "So do I. But to understand how I ended up sitting at a Thanksgiving table ready to destroy my own parents, I have to take you back. I have to take you back 10 years, to the day I signed my life away. 10 years ago, I was 22 years old, fresh out of nursing school, and working my very first job at the county hospital. I was pulling grueling 12-hour night shifts, barely making enough salary to cover my rent, my car insurance, and the mountain of student loans already breathing down my neck. I was living on cheap coffee and frozen dinners. But I was proud. I was finally independent. Then, on a rainy Sunday evening, my father called. He told me I needed to come over to the house right away. It sounded urgent. When I walked through the front door, I found my parents sitting at the kitchen table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows on their faces. A thick stack of paperwork was pushed to the center of the table. My mother's eyes were bloodshot. "We need your help, Josh," my father said, pushing the papers toward me. "Just your signature. The bank needs a cosigner for the mortgage. It's strictly temporary. 6 months, maybe less. Then I'll refinance the house, and your name comes right off." I hesitated. I knew nothing about mortgages or real estate. "Dad, I don't know." My mother reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her tears started falling instantly. "We could lose the house, Joshua. Where will we go? They'll put us out on the street." I was 22. They were my parents. They raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head. I thought this was just what families did for each other. You step up when things get hard. So, I picked up the pen and I signed my name on the dotted line. 6 months turned into a year. A year turned into 5 years. 5 years turned into a decade. Every single time I brought it up, the conversation went exactly the same way. I would ask when he was refinancing. My father would immediately get defensive, claiming his credit wasn't quite there yet, asking if I wanted to see them homeless. My mother would start crying. The guilt trip was a well-oiled machine. But here is what that signature actually cost me. I was essentially financially paralyzed. I couldn't qualify for my own mortgage to buy a starter home. I couldn't even get approved for a decent car loan without getting hit with a brutal, predatory interest rate. My credit score bounced wildly between 580 and 620. Why? Because my father was constantly late on the mortgage payments. Sometimes he was 30 days late. Sometimes he was 60 days late. And he never once told me. I would only find out when I got a credit monitoring alert on my phone at 2 in the morning while I was doing rounds at the hospital. I remember standing in the sterile hallway of the cardiac ward, staring at a notification that my score had dropped 40 points overnight because of 2 60-day late notices I knew absolutely nothing about. I called him the next morning, furious and exhausted. "Dad, what is this? You missed 2 payments." He just brushed it off, his voice completely unbothered. "Things were tight this month, Josh. Don't worry about it. I handled it." He handled it. He handled it by destroying my name and my financial future while he slept soundly in the house I was legally keeping afloat. For 10 years, I carried their debt like a chain around my ankle, thinking my endurance was the same thing as love. I was a fool. My grandfather, Earl Palmer, died on a Tuesday in March. He was 84 years old. Pneumonia, the doctors said. It was quick at the end. I got the call while I was finishing up a shift. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel, letting the tears fall. Grandpa Earl was the man who truly raised me. He taught me how to fish at the lake, taught me how to drive his beat-up Chevy truck on the dirt roads behind his property. When I got accepted into nursing school, he was the only one who actually seemed proud, slipping me a $50 bill and telling me I was going to do great things. The funeral was held in our small hometown, a place where everyone knows everyone else's business, their maiden names, and their church attendance records. It rained the entire day, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked right through my suit jacket. During the service, my father stood at the front of the chapel to deliver the eulogy. He gripped the wooden podium, his knuckles white. He spoke about what a great man my grandfather was, how much he would miss him. His voice cracked at all the right moments. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his eyes. To the rest of the congregation, it looked like the heartbreaking grief of a devoted son. But I had lived with Gerald my whole life. I knew the difference between his real emotions and his performances. His eyes were completely dry behind that handkerchief. After the burial, we gathered in the church hallway. Just me, my father, my mother, and a few close relatives. My father straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and looked at us. "Dad left everything to me," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "The house, the savings accounts, the land. All of it. That was his final wish." No one questioned him. In our family, nobody ever questioned Gerald. I almost didn't either. But something about the way he said it sat wrong in my chest. It was too fast, too rehearsed. like he had been practicing that exact sentence in the mirror for weeks. For the last 3 years of his life, my grandfather and I had drifted apart. I tried calling him, but he never answered. I sent him birthday cards, letters, photos from my job at the hospital. Nothing ever came back. Just complete silence. I told myself he was getting older. Maybe his mind was slipping. Maybe he was angry about something I couldn't remember doing. It hurt, but I accepted it. Now, standing in that cold church hallway, looking at the smug satisfaction barely hidden on my father's face, a terrible thought took root in my mind. Grandpa Earl loved me. He loved all his grandkids. Why would he leave his entire legacy, everything he worked his whole life for, solely to the son he constantly argued with? I didn't say anything that day. I just nodded and went back to my apartment. But the seed of doubt was planted, and it was growing fast. 2 weeks after we buried Grandpa Earl, I drove out to my parents' house. It was time. I had spent 10 years being the dutiful, quiet son, but I was done. I walked into the kitchen and found my father sitting at the table, reading the newspaper with a cup of black coffee. I sat down across from him. "Dad, I need my name off the mortgage. I need it done this year." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stated it as a hard, undeniable fact. My father lowered his newspaper. His jaw tightened instantly. "Now is not the time, Joshua. I just buried my father. Give me some respect." "I know, and I'm sorry," I said, holding my ground. "But this has been 10 years. 10 years of my credit being held hostage. 10 years of late payments. I want to buy my own place. I need off that loan." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You want me to refinance right now? With what credit? You think the banks are just lining up to hand a new mortgage to a 61-year-old man? Then sell the house," I said flatly. "Downsize. Move into an apartment. I don't care how you do it, but I need out." He stood up so fast his chair violently scraped against the linoleum floor. His face turned a dangerous shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged. He leaned over the table, pointing a thick finger right in my face. "You want to talk about lawyers?" he spit out, though I hadn't mentioned a lawyer at all. "You want to sue your own parents? Is that it? Go ahead, Joshua. See how that looks. See how the whole family treats you when they find out you're trying to throw your mother and father out on the street right after your grandfather died." I didn't flinch. I just stared at him, realizing for the first time that there was no love in his eyes, only control. He didn't see me as a son. He saw me as a financial utility. "I'm not trying to throw you out," I said quietly. "I'm trying to start my own life." "You're ungrateful," he snarled. "After everything we've done for you, get out of my house." I drove back to my apartment with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I knew what was coming next. My father was a master manipulator. If I pushed him, he wouldn't just fight back. He would burn the ground beneath me. He would turn the whole family against me to protect his own image. I was sitting on my couch later that night, running the math in my head. If he stopped paying the mortgage entirely out of spite, which he was absolutely vindictive enough to do, the bank would come after me. Foreclosure. My credit score wouldn't just drop. It would crater. It would destroy my life. The hospital where I worked ran routine financial background checks for promotion tracks. A foreclosure could flag a review. I could lose my chance at advancing my career. I was backed into a corner, completely trapped, or so I thought. Couldn't sleep. It was 3 a.m, the kind of deep, quiet night where your thoughts scream the loudest. I was sitting at my small kitchen island, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of my laptop screen. I decided to log into the mortgage account portal. I still had the login credentials from years ago when my father had asked me to set up the online payments for him because he didn't understand how the website worked. I hadn't looked at the actual account details in over a year, preferring to just ignore the anxiety it caused me. I typed in the password, hit enter, and watched the dashboard load. I scanned the numbers, the remaining principal balance, the interest rate, the payment history, littered with those ugly red 30 days past due markers. Then, my eyes caught something else, something new. Right below the main loan summary, there was a second line item. A home equity line of credit. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. I clicked on the details. My heart stopped beating for a full second, and then started hammering so hard it hurt my ribs. 3 months before Grandpa Earl died, someone had taken out a $40,000 withdrawal against the equity of the house. I stared at the number, $40,000. My father hadn't just kept my name trapped on the original mortgage. He had used my co-signature, my credit history, to borrow 40 grand in cash against the house without ever telling me, without my consent, without a single word. He had forged my electronic authorization or bypassed the security checks to pull money out, legally tying that new massive debt directly to my name. A cold, heavy numbness washed over me. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment. This wasn't just financial irresponsibility anymore. This was theft. This was fraud. My own father had robbed me. Where did the money go? $40,000 doesn't just vanish. They hadn't renovated the house. They hadn't bought a new car. The money was just gone. He didn't just trap me in a cage. He went back and made the cage smaller, heavier, impossible to break out of. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew if he defaulted, I would be on the hook for all of it. I closed the laptop slowly. I didn't feel like crying anymore. The sadness, the guilt, the obligation I had felt for the last 10 years evaporated in an instant, replaced by something entirely different. It was a cold, pure, focused rage. They thought I was weak. They thought because I was quiet, because I was the dutiful son who always avoided conflict, that I would just take this. They thought I would roll over and let them ruin me. I picked up my phone and looked at a picture of Grandpa Earl I kept saved in my favorites. "I'm not letting them win, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. I was done playing defense. It was time to find out exactly what else my father had been lying about. The rumors didn't start with a loud explosion. They started like a slow gas leak, poisoning the air around me until I couldn't breathe. It started at church. First Baptist, the congregation my family had attended for 3 decades. I walked into the fellowship hall after Sunday service, grabbing a styrofoam cup of coffee. I saw Mrs. Gentry, a woman who had known me since I was in kindergarten, standing near the pastry table. I smiled and started to walk toward her. She looked right at me, her eyes freezing over, then deliberately turned her back and walked to the other side of the room. She didn't say a word, but the message was deafening. Then it bled into my workplace. Dr. Gray, the attending physician on my floor and a man I deeply respected, pulled me aside near the nurse's station on a busy Tuesday afternoon. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from side to side. "Hey, Joshua," he said, lowering his voice. "Is everything okay at home? I heard some things from folks in town. Something about your grandfather's estate? Listen, if you need time off to deal with some legal trouble, just let me know." My stomach dropped. Legal trouble? Dr. Gray, what exactly did you hear? I asked, keeping my voice level. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Just talk, you know how this town is. People are saying you took some cash from your grandfather's house right before he passed. I don't believe it, of course, but, my own parents were doing this. My mother, Denise, and my father, Gerald, were systematically calling aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, planting the seed. They were telling everyone, casually, like it was an established tragedy, that I had stolen money from Grandpa Earl's dresser drawer. He was over there alone a lot near the end, my father had reportedly told Uncle Thomas. We found the drawer completely empty after the funeral. Thousands in cash, just gone. It breaks his mother's heart. There was no proof, of course. There didn't need to be. In a small town, an older, respected father's sorrowful word carries massive weight. They were building a narrative. If I ever tried to expose the $40,000 they stole from the equity, or if I ever questioned the inheritance, the entire town was already primed to believe one thing. Joshua is the thief. Joshua is the villain. Joshua is just trying to cover his own tracks. Every time I tried to defend myself to a relative on the phone, I sounded defensive, frantic, which only made me sound more guilty. My parents had trapped me in a PR nightmare. But my father made one crucial mistake. He was too specific. He told people I took money from a specific dresser drawer in Grandpa's bedroom. How did Gerald know Grandpa kept emergency cash in that specific drawer? Unless he had been digging through it himself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was projecting. He was accusing me of exactly what he had done. I didn't wait around for the gossip to destroy me. On my first day off, I drove 45 minutes out of town to the county courthouse. I didn't even bother changing out of my blue hospital scrubs. I parked in the back lot, my heart pounding a steady, nervous rhythm against my ribs. I walked into the probate office. The air smelled of floor wax and old, dusty paper. The clerk, a woman named Diane with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked up from her computer. "I need a copy of the probate file for Earl James Palmer," I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. "Deceased March of this year." "Relation?" she asked, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "Grandson. Probate records are public. Anyone can walk in and request them, a fact my father clearly hadn't considered, assuming I would be too intimidated to ever check." Diane printed out a thick stack of papers, slid them into a manila folder, and handed them across the counter. I didn't even wait to get to my car. I sat down on a hard wooden bench right there in the courthouse hallway and opened the folder. There it was, the last will and testament of Earl James Palmer, the document my father had filed to claim the entire estate. It was typed, officially notarized, and dated 14 months before my grandfather died. It read exactly as my father had claimed: "I leave all real and personal property to my son, Gerald Ray Palmer. The house, the savings accounts, everything." I read the words twice, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Then, I flipped to the last page and looked at the signature at the bottom. Earl James Palmer. I had seen my grandfather's handwriting thousands of times. I knew it from decades of birthday cards, from the memo lines of every check he ever wrote, from a sticky note he left on my dashboard when I graduated nursing school that said, "Proud of the man you are, Josh." His real handwriting was distinct. As he got older, his hand shook, making his letters jagged. His E always leaned heavily to the left, and the tail of his P swooped down long and sharp. I stared at the signature on the legal document. It was a good copy, but it wasn't him. The E was too upright. The P was completely short, cut off bluntly. The entire signature lacked the natural, shaky rhythm of an 84-year-old man. It was too careful, too slow, drawn by someone trying very hard to trace a shape they had only seen a few times. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and took a high-resolution photo of the signature. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't scared. I was absolutely certain. My father forged the will. He stole my grandfather's legacy. I opened the browser on my phone and typed into the search bar, "Forensic accountant near me." I was going to rip his lies apart, piece by piece. Robert had an office above a hardware store 2 towns over. He was a forensic accountant with 20 years of experience tracing hidden assets in messy divorce cases and corporate fraud. He was a quiet, clinical man who didn't care about family drama. He only cared about the math. I sat across from his cluttered desk, wearing my only decent suit, and handed him the courthouse file, along with 17 verified samples of my grandfather's real signature I had dug out of old shoe boxes. A week later, I was back in his office. Robert placed a thick, bound report on the desk between us. "The signature on the filed will is a forgery," Robert said flatly, pointing a pen at a magnified side-by-side comparison on page 1. "It's not a match, not even close under microscopic analysis. It was drawn, not written." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I knew it. "But that's not the worst part," Robert continued, flipping to the financial section of the report. "I pulled the bank records associated with the estate. At the time of his death, your grandfather's savings account held $280,000. The property appraised at roughly $190,000. Total estate value of approximately $470,000. I stared at the numbers. Grandpa Earl had saved his pennies his entire life. After the probate closed, Robert said, tracing a line down a spreadsheet, Gerald withdrew $350,000 in liquid assets across several rapid transactions. I mapped where it went. He pushed the paper toward me. $120,000 went immediately to pay off Gerald's massive, secret personal credit card debt. $60,000 was transferred into an offshore account under my mother's maiden name. $45,000 went to a contractor for luxury renovations on their kitchen. And then, I saw the final line item. My blood ran cold. $85,000 wire transfer, European auto dealership. What is this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Robert adjusted his glasses. That wire transfer was used to purchase a brand new Porsche 911. The title was registered to a Christian Palmer. Christian, my younger brother, the golden child. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. Christian was 28, living rent-free in my parents' basement, constantly jumping between startup ideas, while I worked 12-hour shifts to pay the mortgage on the roof over his head. While my father was ruining my credit score and stealing $40,000 in equity under my name, he used my dead grandfather's stolen money to buy his favorite son a luxury sports car. The blatant, cruel favoritism made me physically sick. They were draining me dry to fund a lavish lifestyle for themselves and Christian. Do you want me to compile this into an official, certified affidavit? Robert asked quietly. Because once I do, this becomes actionable evidence. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. I looked at the line item for the Porsche. I thought about the fake tears my mother cried. Do it, I said. Seal it. Armed with the forensic evidence, I needed an ally. I needed someone in the family with influence who could stand with me when the truth came out. I thought of Uncle Thomas, my father's older brother. Thomas had always been the voice of reason, the mediator in family disputes. He was wealthy, respected, and had always been kind to me. I called him and asked to meet at a quiet diner on the edge of town. When he arrived, I ordered us coffees and took a deep breath. I didn't show him the forensic report yet. I wanted to gauge his reaction first, but I told him everything else. I told him about the $40,000 equity theft. I told him about my suspicions regarding the forged will. For the first 20 minutes, Thomas listened intently. He nodded, his face lined with concern. I knew Gerald was terrible with money, Thomas murmured, stirring his coffee. But stealing your equity? Forging a signature? Joshua, this is heavy stuff. It's the truth, Uncle Thomas, I pleaded. They're ruining my life and poisoning the family against me. I need you to help me confront him. Thomas went quiet. He took a slow sip of his coffee, looking out the window at the rainy parking lot. When he looked back at me, his entire demeanor had shifted. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating distance. Joshua, listen to me, he said, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative register. Family is family. Gerald has a temper, yes, but bringing lawyers into this, tearing the family apart over money? It's not just money, it's fraud, I argued, my voice rising. Keep your voice down, Thomas snapped. He leaned across the table. Your father told me you might try something like this. He told me you were stressed, lashing out because you were broke. I froze. He talked to you? Thomas sighed, pulling his coat collar up. Gerald came to see me last week. He's struggling, Joshua. He needed a little help to cover some legal fees regarding the estate taxes. I loaned him $50,000 to keep him afloat. If you start a legal war, the estate gets frozen. I don't get my money back, and our family name gets dragged through the mud in this town. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. Thomas wasn't a mediator. He was an investor. My father had bought his loyalty with a piece of the stolen pie. You're protecting him because he owes you, I said, disgusted. I'm protecting the family, Thomas corrected smoothly. Let it go, Joshua. Walk away. If you don't, you won't just be fighting your father. You'll be fighting all of us. You'll be entirely alone. He stood up, dropped a $5 bill on the table for his coffee, and walked out. I sat alone in the booth, staring at the cold coffee. My own uncle had sold me out. They really thought I would back down out of fear of being ostracized. They thought isolation would break me. They were wrong. It didn't break me. It just removed the last ounce of mercy I had left for them. With my immediate family firmly aligned against me, I realized I had to look outside the inner circle. I thought of Uncle David, Grandpa Earl's younger brother. David was 72, a retired mechanic who lived a quiet life on a farm an hour out of town. He hadn't attended a family dinner in over a decade due to a bitter, unspoken falling out with my father, Gerald. If anyone knew the truth about Grandpa, it was David. I drove out to his farm on a crisp Thursday morning. The air smelled of cedar trees and damp earth. David met me on the porch, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He didn't look surprised to see me. "I figured you'd show up eventually, boy," he said roughly, motioning for me to come inside. His kitchen was small and smelled of old coffee. We sat at a worn wooden table. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him my father had filed a will claiming everything and was accusing me of stealing. David let out a dry, bitter laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Gerald hasn't changed a bit. Always a liar, always a thief." He stood up, walked into the living room, and came back holding a battered, old shoebox. He set it down on the table between us with a heavy thud. "Your grandfather knew Gerald was circling like a vulture," David said quietly. "3 years ago, Earl drove out here, sat in that exact chair you're in. He handed me this box and told me to hide it. Said if anything ever happened to him, I was to wait until you came looking for the truth." My hands shook as I reached out and opened the lid. Inside lay a thick, yellowed envelope. I pulled out the papers. It was a last will and testament. But this one wasn't typed. It was handwritten on legal pad paper. The ink faded, but the slanted, shaky handwriting unmistakably Grandpa Earl's. It was dated 5 years prior and witnessed by 2 of David's neighbors. I read the core clause aloud, my voice cracking. "I leave all real and personal property to be divided equally among my 4 grandchildren. Joshua, Caleb, Christian, and Megan. My son, Gerald, receives nothing." Grandpa hadn't left me out. He had explicitly cut my father out to protect us. But that wasn't all. Beneath the will lay a stack of unmailed letters. I picked the top one up. "Dear Josh," the letter read, "Your dad came by today. Told me you're too busy at the hospital to see me anymore. Said you wanted space. I don't believe him, but I won't bother you if it's true. Just know I'm proud of you, son. Always." Tears, hot and fast, spilled down my cheeks, blurring the ink. For 3 years, my father had been the gatekeeper. He intercepted my calls. He lied to my grandfather, telling him I had abandoned him, and he lied to me, making me think Grandpa was ignoring me. He broke an old man's heart just to isolate him and steal his money. "He died thinking I didn't care," I whispered, the pain sharp and agonizing in my chest. David reached over and gripped my shoulder tight. "He died knowing you'd find the truth, Joshua. That's why he left the sword with me. Now you take it and you use it." I left David's farm with the shoebox secured on my passenger seat like precious cargo. I finally had the motive, the real will, and the forensic proof. But I needed one more piece to ensure my parents couldn't wriggle their way out of this with their usual manipulative lies. The universe provided it that very night. At 10:15 p.m., my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was Caleb, my 24-year-old cousin. Caleb was a quiet kid, terrified of conflict, who usually just kept his head down to avoid my father's wrath. I answered, "Caleb? It's late. Everything okay?" "Josh," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly I could barely hear him. "Don't ask how I got this. Just promise me you won't tell them it came from me. My mom would kill me. I promise." "What is it?" "I was at your parents' house 2 weeks ago, fixing their router in the hallway. They didn't know I was there. They were in the kitchen fighting. I hit record on my phone. My breath hitched. Send it to me, right now. A moment later, an audio file pinged into my messages. I pressed play, holding the phone tight against my ear. The audio was muffled, recorded through a wall, but the voices were undeniable. I told you to pay that mortgage. My mother, Denise, hissed fiercely. If Joshua finds out about the equity loan, he'll go to the police. Shut up, Denise. My father snarled back. He won't do a damn thing. He's too weak. The fake will is already filed and approved by probate. It's done. There was a pause, the sound of a chair scraping. But what if he gets a lawyer? My mother asked, her voice tight with panic. Then we strike first. Gerald's voice came through cold, calculated, and purely evil. We go louder. We tell the family he stole the cash from Earl's room. We make him the villain. Nobody's going to believe a broke nurse over us. By the time Thanksgiving rolls around, I'll have him begging for mercy. The recording clicked off. I stood in my kitchen, the silence ringing in my ears. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had actively, maliciously conspired to destroy my reputation and my life to cover up their felony. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I drove straight to the office of Andrew Vance, the most ruthless estate litigation lawyer in the county. I sat in his plush leather chair and laid everything out on his mahogany desk. The forensic report from Robert tracing the $350,000 and the Porsche. The real, handwritten will from Uncle David. And finally, I played the audio recording of my parents' conspiracy. Andrew listened in complete silence. When it was over, he steepled his fingers, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Joshua, the lawyer said, tapping the forensic report. This isn't just a civil dispute anymore. This is criminal fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy. You have a nuclear bomb sitting on this desk. I don't want to just file a lawsuit behind closed doors. I told him, my voice colder than it had ever been. My father wants to make a public spectacle at Thanksgiving. He invited 30 people to watch him destroy me. Andrew leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Then we let him build his stage. And when the curtain goes up, we burn the theater to the ground. Armed with my envelope, I was ready for Thanksgiving. We are back at that Thanksgiving table. 30 people crammed into Aunt Marlene's living room. The smell of roasted turkey completely overpowered by the suffocating tension in the air. My father, Gerald, was standing at the head of the table like a king holding court. He had just declared to our entire extended family that I was a thief. He had just thrown a white envelope at me, claiming it was a court summons. I looked at the envelope resting right next to my dinner plate. Then I looked up at my father's smug, satisfied face. My mother, Denise, was still dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin, playing the devastated, heartbroken victim to absolute perfection. Down the table, my younger brother Christian, the golden child of the family, was leaning back in his wooden chair with a nasty smirk on his face. He thought this was funny. He thought I was finally getting put in my place. He thought they had won. I picked up the envelope my father threw at me. I didn't rip it open in a panic. I didn't let my hands shake. I slid my index finger under the flap, popped it open, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. I held it up to the light hanging over the dining table. The room was so incredibly quiet you could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Everyone was watching me, waiting for the meltdown. They expected me to start screaming, crying, or begging for forgiveness. Uncle Thomas, the man who had sold me out for a $50,000 loan just days earlier, was staring hard at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. "A court summons," I said aloud. My voice was perfectly calm. I didn't yell. I just read the paper in my hands. "That is terrifying, Dad. Really. It looks very official at first glance." I looked around the table. Aunt Marlene was clutching her water glass. My cousin Caleb looked like he might pass out. "There is just one massive problem with this document," I continued, dropping the paper back onto the table with a soft smack. "There is no case number printed on it. There is no county clerk's filing stamp anywhere in the margins. It is not printed on official legal cardstock. The font is Basic Times New Roman, and the signature at the bottom belongs to a judge who retired from the county circuit over 5 years ago. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, locking eyes with my father. You printed this off the internet, Dad. You faked a legal document to scare me in front of 30 people because you thought I would just stand up, cry, and run out the front door. You thought I would surrender my inheritance out of sheer embarrassment. My father's face flushed a deep, dangerous red. The veins in his neck popped. "How dare you?" he roared, slamming his hand on the back of his chair. "You stole from your own grandfather, and now you are making up lies to cover your tracks. You are a disgrace to this family, Joshua." I didn't react to his shouting. I didn't raise my voice to match his. I simply reached down under my chair and picked up my own thick, heavy manila envelope. The one my lawyer, Andrew Vance, had prepared for me. "You want to talk about proof, Dad?" I asked, my voice cutting through his screaming like ice. "Let's talk about proof." I opened my manila envelope. I didn't just have one flimsy piece of paper printed from a home office. I had 30 copies of a bound, certified legal dossier. I stood up from my chair and started walking around the long table. I handed a copy to Aunt Marlene. I handed a copy to Uncle Thomas. I handed a copy to my cousin Caleb. I handed one to every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had whispered behind my back for the last 3 months. "What is this, Joshua?" Aunt Marlene asked, her hands trembling as she looked at the thick cover page. "That," I said, walking slowly back to my seat, "is a certified forensic accounting report. I didn't just guess what happened. I hired a professional investigator. If you open to page 1, you will see a side-by-side microscopic comparison of the signature on the will my father filed in probate court, placed right next to 17 verified signatures from Grandpa Earl. 30 pairs of hands opened the folders at the exact same time. The sound of heavy paper turning filled the room. Aunt Marlene put her reading glasses on. The forensic expert concluded without a shadow of a doubt that the signature on the filed will is a complete forgery. I announced. My voice rang out clear, hard, and undeniable. Grandpa Earl never signed that document. My father drew it. "That is an absolute lie," my father screamed. He slammed both fists on the table, rattling the silverware and knocking over a water glass. "You paid someone to write that garbage. You are manipulating this entire family." "Keep turning the pages, Dad," I said coldly. I looked directly at my mother. Her fake tears had stopped completely. Her face was chalk white, all the blood draining from her cheeks. "If you look at page 3, I told the room, making sure everyone was following along, "you will see the bank records directly from Grandpa Earl's accounts. When Grandpa died, his estate was worth roughly $470,000. Within weeks of the funeral, my father illegally withdrew $350,000 in cash and wire transfers." A collective gasp went around the table. Uncle Thomas looked physically sick, his face turning a shade of green. Aunt Marlene covered her mouth with both hands. "Where did the money go?" I asked the room, letting the question hang in the air for a split second. "Well, let's look at the ledger. $120,000 went immediately to pay off Gerald's secret, massive credit card debt. $60,000 was wired to an offshore account registered in my mother's maiden name. $45,000 paid a luxury contractor for the brand new kitchen they just installed in their house." I turned my head and locked eyes with my brother, Christian. His arrogant smirk was completely gone. His jaw hung open. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding truck. "And $85,000, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow echoed louder than a shout, "was wired to a European auto dealership to purchase a brand new Porsche 911, registered directly in Christian Palmer's name." Christian pushed his chair back so violently it tipped over and hit the floor. "You shut your mouth," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Dad bought me that car as a graduation gift. It was a gift. Dad bought you that car with Grandpa's life savings." I shot back, pointing a finger right at his chest. while I was working 12-hour night shifts at the hospital to pay the mortgage on the house you all live in rent-free. Which brings me to the very next page. I didn't let them breathe. I didn't let them recover or form a lie. I just kept hitting them with the undeniable truth. 10 years ago, my parents begged me to co-sign their mortgage. They swore to me it would be for 6 months. It has been a decade. They ruined my credit with constant late payments. But that wasn't enough for them. 3 months before Grandpa died, my father used my credit profile to take out a $40,000 home equity line of credit. He forged my authorization, bypassed the bank security, and stole 40 grand under my name. The room was paralyzed. The level of betrayal was so massive, so cold and calculated, that nobody knew what to say. My father was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he gripped the edge of the table. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically, desperately searching for an ally. He looked right at Uncle Thomas. "Thomas, tell them he's crazy," Gerald pleaded, his voice losing its power, turning into a desperate whine. "Tell them he's making this up because he's broke and bitter." Uncle Thomas looked down at the forensic report in his hands. He saw the wire transfers. He saw the undeniable proof of the stolen money. He slowly shook his head, staring at the table, and absolutely refused to look up at his brother. My father turned back to me, his eyes wild with the fury of a trapped animal. "You have nothing. This is all fabricated garbage. It will never hold up in court. I am the legal executor of the estate. It is my money. The will is filed, and it is done." I stood there for a long moment, looking at the man who was supposed to raise me, protect me, and guide me. He was so incredibly arrogant. He truly believed that because he was the patriarch, because he yelled the loudest, he could rewrite reality. "The will is filed and it's done?" I repeated his exact words slowly, letting them sink in. "That is exactly what you said in your kitchen 2 weeks ago. Isn't it, Dad?" My mother flinched as if I had physically struck her across the face. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine fear now. I looked across the table at my cousin Caleb. He was sitting next to his mother, pale, sweating, and gripping the edge of the table. He gave me a tiny, terrified nod. Caleb was brave. He knew this would cause an absolute earthquake in the family, but he chose the truth anyway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I swiped the screen and synced it to the large Bluetooth speaker sitting on the kitchen counter right behind me. I turned the volume all the way up. "Let's see what you and Mom really think when you believe nobody is listening," I said. I pressed play. The audio crackled through the speaker, loud, sharp, and undeniable. It was my mother's voice first, filled with frantic panic. "If Joshua finds out about the equity loan, he'll go to the police." 30 people stopped breathing at the exact same time. My mother grabbed the edge of the table, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She looked like she was going to be sick. Then my father's voice echoed through the dining room. Cold, cruel, malicious. "Shut up, Denise. He won't do a damn thing. He's too weak. The fake will is already filed and approved by probate. It's done." Aunt Marlene let out a sharp, devastated cry. Uncle Thomas closed his eyes and buried his face in his hands. The recording continued. My mother's voice again, trembling. "But what if he gets a lawyer?" And then came the final nail in the coffin. My father's exact blueprint for my destruction, played out for the entire family to hear. Then we strike first. We go louder. We tell the family he stole the cash from Earl's room. We make him the villain. Nobody's going to believe a broke nurse over us. By the time Thanksgiving rolls around, I'll have him begging for mercy. The audio file clicked off. The silence that followed was the heaviest, most suffocating silence I have ever experienced in my entire life. It wasn't just quiet. It was a physical weight pressing down on the room. It was the sound of an entire family realizing they had been used, manipulated, and lied to by a monster wearing a father's face. I looked at my father. He was completely, utterly broken. His broad shoulders slumped forward. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He had no defense. He couldn't scream his way out of his own recorded confession. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and slipped it on. "I am not begging for mercy, Dad," I said calmly into the dead silence. "I am calling my lawyer. Happy Thanksgiving." I didn't walk out of the house immediately. I stood there near the door and watched the empire my father built on lies crumble to dust in real time. Aunt Marlene was the very first to move. She stood up, her face tight with intense disgust. She didn't look at my mother, her own sister. She didn't say a single word. She just walked over to the coat rack, pulled down her heavy winter jacket, and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent house. That was the signal. The dam broke. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had known Gerald their entire lives, started standing up in unison. They dropped their cloth napkins on their half-eaten plates of turkey and dressing. They grabbed their children by the hands and pulled them away from the table. Nobody yelled. Nobody demanded an apology. The absolute silence of their departure was far more punishing than any screaming match could ever be. They were treating my parents like they were radioactive. Uncle Thomas stood up slowly. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in. He walked past my father, stopping for just a second. "You owe me 50 grand, Gerald," Thomas said, his voice flat, completely devoid of any brotherly affection. "I want it by the end of the month, or I'll sue you too." Then, he turned and walked out the door. My brother Christian was in full panic mode. He finally realized what this actually meant for his comfortable, lazy life. He rushed around the table, his face frantic, and grabbed my arm. "Josh, man, come on. Look at me. I didn't know the car was bought with Grandpa's money. I swear on my life. You can't let them take the Porsche. My whole life is tied to that car. You have to tell the lawyer to leave me out of this. We're brothers." I looked down at his hand gripping my sleeve. I looked at his panicked face. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no pity, no brotherly bond. Just a cold, clinical detachment. "You should probably go home and hide the keys, Christian," I told him, my voice completely flat, "because the bank is coming for it on Monday." I pulled my arm away from his grip and walked toward the door. I looked back one last time. My mother was sobbing hysterically into her hands, but nobody was comforting her. Nobody was rushing to bring her a tissue. My father was sitting alone at the head of a massive, empty table, staring blankly at the cold food. He was completely isolated. He had pushed everyone away to protect his greed, and now he had absolutely nothing left. I walked out into the crisp November air, got into my car, and drove away. For the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could finally take a deep breath. Monday morning arrived, sharp and unforgiving. I was sitting in Andrew Vance's law office at 9 o'clock sharp. Andrew was drinking a dark roast coffee, reviewing the final draft of the legal ultimatum we were about to drop on my parents like an anvil. "They have absolutely no moves left, Joshua," Andrew said, tapping his expensive pen on the mahogany desk. "The audio recording you provided establishes clear, malicious intent. The forensic report establishes the financial action. The forged will establishes the mechanism of the fraud. This is a slam dunk in any court in the state." "So what happens right now?" I asked, leaning forward. Andrew slid a thick, certified legal document across the desk toward me. "This is a formal demand letter. It is being couriered to your father's house by a process server as we speak. We are giving him exactly 60 calendar days to completely refinance the mortgage on that house and remove your name from the debt. Furthermore, he is legally required to assume full liability for the $40,000 equity line of credit he fraudulently opened in your name." I read over the dense legal jargon. "And if he refuses?" He told me to my face he couldn't get approved for a refinance because of his age and credit. Andrew smiled, a sharp, predatory grin that made me glad he was on my side. "If he refuses, or if he claims he cannot secure financing, we file an immediate motion to force the sale of the property to cover the debt. But more importantly, The letter clearly states that if your name is not removed from that debt within 60 days, we will hand the audio recording and the forensic report directly to the county district attorney and file criminal charges for grand larceny, identity theft, and estate fraud. He will go to state prison. It is that simple. My father was a classic coward. He liked to bully people who were too scared or too kind to fight back. But facing a ruthless litigation lawyer and the very real, very imminent threat of a concrete prison cell, all his arrogant bravado vanished overnight. He didn't fight it. He didn't call me to argue. He didn't try to send my mother or Uncle Thomas to negotiate a peace treaty. He knew the gig was completely up. I later found out from Uncle David that Gerald had to empty what little was left of his own retirement accounts, beg a high-interest private lender in the next town over, and put up his own truck as collateral just to secure a miserable, incredibly expensive loan to buy me out of the mortgage. He trapped himself in a financial prison of his own making just to stay out of a real one. 5 weeks later, it was a freezing, overcast Tuesday afternoon in late December. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. We had been short-staffed in the ER, and I was running on 4 hours of sleep and stale cafeteria coffee. I walked out to the employee parking lot, my boots crunching on the icy asphalt, wrapping my coat tight around me. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and turned the key just to run the heater. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email notification. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The subject line from the bank read, "Mortgage release confirmation, official document enclosed." My hands started to shake. I opened the email. Attached was a formal PDF letter from the lending institution. It stated, in clear, beautiful black and white text, that Joshua Palmer was officially and legally released from all liability regarding the mortgage property. My name was gone. The $40,000 equity debt was gone. The 10-year chain around my neck had finally been shattered. I dropped the phone into my lap. I rested my forehead against the cold steering wheel, and I completely broke down. I cried. I sobbed until my chest physically ached. They weren't sad tears. It was the massive, overwhelming release of a decade of crushing anxiety. 10 years of waking up in the middle of the night wondering if my father's missed payments were going to leave me bankrupt. 10 years of feeling like I was drowning in the ocean while holding them above water. It was finally over. I was free. The very next month, the effects were undeniable. Without that massive, toxic debt dragging down my debt-to-income ratio, and without the constant barrage of late payment flags from my father, my credit score shot up by over 100 points. At the hospital, the Human Resources Department ran their annual background and financial review for promotions. Because my financial background check came back completely clean and stellar, I was officially approved to enter the management track. My boss, Dr. Gray, called me into his office and offered me the promotion to head charge nurse with a massive salary bump. My life, the one I had put on hold at 22 years old, was finally truly beginning. While I was rapidly rebuilding my life, the legal system was methodically tearing my father's apart. With the real, handwritten will submitted to the court, the probate judge immediately froze all of Gerald's remaining bank accounts and assets. The forged will was thrown out entirely, and the judge issued a blistering reprimand on the record regarding the blatant fraud. The estate was ordered to be redistributed exactly as Grandpa Earl had written it in his own hand, divided equally among the 4 grandchildren, myself, Caleb, Christian, and our cousin Megan. Because my father had already spent so much of the cash, the court moved aggressively to recover the stolen funds. Christian's beloved Porsche 911 was legally seized by the county sheriff's department. I heard from Caleb that Christian literally stood in the driveway and cried like a child as the tow truck hauled his status symbol away. The car was auctioned off by the county, and the proceeds were put directly back into the estate trust. My parents were ordered to pay back the $45,000 they used for their luxury kitchen renovation, forcing them to take out yet another crippling personal loan. They were drowning in high-interest debt, completely isolated from the entire family, and living in a house they could now barely afford to heat in the winter. When the dust finally settled and the lawyers were paid, the remaining estate was divided up. It wasn't a massive fortune after the legal fees and the lost cash, but it was significant. I received a certified check for $65,000. My cousin Megan called me the day the checks cleared the bank. She was crying hysterically on the phone. "Josh, I don't even know how to thank you. My husband got laid off last month. We were a week away from losing our apartment. This money, I'm putting a chunk of it straight into a college fund for my daughter, and the rest is saving our home. You saved us, Josh." I smiled, looking out the window of my apartment at the city skyline. "It wasn't me, Megan," I told her softly. "It was Grandpa Earl. He took care of us, just like he always wanted to." For months after that explosive Thanksgiving dinner, I closed on my own house. It wasn't a massive mansion. It was a modest, 3-bedroom ranch-style home on a quiet, tree-lined street about 10 minutes from the hospital. It had a big backyard and a wide, wraparound front porch. But it was mine. My name was the only name on the deed. My spotless credit secured the loan with an incredibly low interest rate. I used a portion of Grandpa's inheritance for the down payment, and I kept the rest safely invested in an index fund for my future. The first night in the house, I didn't have any furniture delivered yet. I sat right on the hardwood floor of the living room, eating a slice of pepperoni pizza from a cardboard box. I pulled a hammer and a nail out of my duffel bag. I walked over to the center of the living room wall, right above the fireplace, drove the nail in, and hung a framed photograph. It was a picture of Grandpa Earl holding a massive bass he had caught at the lake, grinning from ear to ear, looking so proud and full of life. I stepped back, crossed my arms, and looked at it. "We did it, Grandpa," I said softly to the empty room. The next morning, my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it cautiously, putting it on speaker. "Joshua." It was my mother, Denise. Her voice sounded thin, frail, and incredibly tired. It lacked all the theatrical drama she usually employed. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice completely neutral. I wanted to see how you were doing," she stammered, sounding nervous. "Aunt Marlene told me you bought a house. Congratulations. Your father and I, we're struggling, Josh. The legal bills are piling up. Christian had to move out because we can't afford his expenses anymore. He's sleeping on a friend's couch. We miss you. We want to apologize for how things got out of hand. We want to be a family again." I stood in the bright, sunny kitchen of my new home. I looked around at the clean, empty space. I thought about the 10 years of financial manipulation. I thought about the fake court summons they threw in my face. I thought about the secret recording where she actively conspired to ruin my professional and personal reputation just to protect a stolen inheritance. "I forgive you, Mom," I said, and I actually meant it. Holding on to the burning anger was only poisoning my own heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. You and Dad made your choices. You chose money over your own son. You chose a vicious lie over the truth. I wish you the best, but I am not doing this anymore. I am not your safety net. Do not call this number again. I hung up the phone before she could start crying. I blocked the number immediately. I drew the boundary line in thick, permanent marker, and I stepped over it into my new life without looking back. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in late spring, about a year after the dust had finally settled. I was sitting on the wide wooden porch of Uncle David's farmhouse, drinking a glass of cold, sweet iced tea. The field stretched out green and vibrant under the wide blue sky, the wind rustling through the tall grass. David was sitting in a rocking chair right next to me, quietly carving a piece of cedar wood with an old pocket knife. "You look good, boy," David said, pausing his carving to glance over at me. "You look lighter, like you dropped 100 pounds of rocks off your back." "I feel lighter, Uncle David," I admitted, taking a long sip of the cold tea. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out an old, slightly faded photograph. It was one of the items I had found at the very bottom of the shoebox David had given me all those months ago. It was a picture of me when I was maybe 5 years old, sitting high up on Grandpa Earl's shoulders. We were both laughing at the camera, completely carefree, bathed in summer sunlight. I flipped the photo over. On the back, written in Grandpa's distinct, shaky, beautiful handwriting, were three simple words: my boy Joshua. For so long, I thought that being a good son meant enduring the pain. I thought that family meant unconditional loyalty, even when that exact loyalty was being weaponized against me to destroy my future. I let my parents use my love and my sense of duty as a currency to fund their own selfishness. I used to think I was just a victim of circumstance. But sitting on that peaceful porch, looking at my grandfather's handwriting, I realized something incredibly important. I didn't win a war. You never really win a war against your own blood. There is always massive collateral damage. There are always deep scars left behind. I didn't win a war against my parents. I just stopped being a casualty. I realized that setting a firm boundary isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of absolute survival. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm, especially when they are the ones holding the match and complaining about the smoke. Grandpa Earl knew that. He knew the darkness and the greed inside his own son, and he left me the tools to fight it. He left me his love, and he left me the undeniable truth. And in the end, the truth was the only weapon I needed. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It's not an easy thing to share, laying your family's darkest secrets out like this, but I know there are people out there walking through the exact same darkness I did, and I want them to know there is a way out. You don't have to carry their debt, emotional or financial, forever. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to choose between your own sanity and the toxic demands of your family? How did you handle it? Did you walk away, or did you stay and fight? Let me know down in the comments. I read as many as I possibly can. Now, for those of you who have been with me since the very first second of this video, you are part of a very special group. If you made it all the way to the end of this journey, I want you to drop the letter W in the comments. W stands for winner. That is our secret code. It's the mark of the 1% Club, the incredible group of people who stick around, listen, and support each other through the toughest, most painful stories. When I see that W in the comments, I know exactly who you are, and I appreciate you more than you know. Please don't forget to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, follow the channel so we can keep sharing these journeys together. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.